Hi, my name is Kyle. I have no...
China, let's call upon the Prime Minister to open this debate. Hear.
Just to check again, I'm audible, right?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, just set my timer. In order to decide whether Malaysia should abandon non-alignment and pivot foreign policy in favor of China, I think we first need to understand what exactly does Malaysia looks like as a nation. Malaysia is a developing nation, which means three things. The first is that they have yet to fully be confident with their financial position. The second is they have the need to make strategic alignment with nations to fully ensure they get to develop their economy at its best. And thirdly, their priority is also to ensure regional security, by avoiding any sort of aggression with other countries in Asia or any conflict that might lead towards a destabilization of their own economy. And due to the fact that they are a developing nation with all of these characteristics, we believe that they have a lot of things at stake, which is why we believe that it's important to consider first and foremost what Malaysia stands to gain from the foreign policy. I have one issue in my speech, which is whether alignment with China through foreign policy would complement Malaysia's economic interests. Let's look at first and foremost what exactly is Malaysia's interests. Three things. The first is to develop their economic growth. The second is to forge stronger ties with developed countries regionally. And the third is to gain a standing in the global market. So what exactly does pivoting foreign policy towards the direction of China actually look like? This looks like firstly being able to gain more trade deals with China. The second is to be able to be a part of a larger trade network due to the fact that we are aligning ourselves with China. And the third is to actually be a part of a lot of China's incentives to actually expand itself as a global superpower economically, like being a part of the One Belt, One Road initiative and actually being the center of a lot of the other plans in which Malaysia can seriously benefit from in terms of the economic perspective. But let's look at first and foremost, what exactly is the incentive for China to actually want to offer Malaysia all of these things that Malaysia seeks to expect, like the trade deals, being a part of the trade network, and being a part of the One Belt One Road initiative. We think that there are two things that China seeks to gain from Malaysia. The first is that Malaysia has the Straits of Malacca, which is an important commercial strait that actually supplies as a global superpower, global power, because of the fact that it actually allows for a lot of trades to happen in the first place. We think that as much as possible, China would want to actually retain like a good relationship with countries that actually have straits or any sort of initiatives or route that are actually ensuring that they are able to access the larger market and also be able to expand themselves economically, because that is China's incentive. But secondly, we think that China would not want to risk full-on for no reason, because they wouldn't want to always force their hand or to display their military power or start to be aggressive towards any other country. They have to be as diplomatic as possible because they care about their about actually appearing as a good and trustworthy ally towards a lot of other countries. Unless there is a subject of competition or there is a subject of between them and any other country, we don't see any reason as to why exactly China would refuse to offer all these benefits to Malaysia when it can directly benefit them as well in terms of economically, as mentioned earlier, by the Straits of Malacca, but also secondly in terms of diplomatic relations with other countries, because they do not want to risk conflict and want to appear and display a good image as a whole. But then we move on towards the next thing, which is why exactly is non-alignment harmful and at best does not serve any sort of a competition to China in terms of the disputes that they're having, or whether it be the United States, for example. We think that China has the capacity to be more aggressive. Why exactly is this so? Because we can look at like recently, China's recent developments include launching large amphibious warfare ships and new nuclear and conventional submarines, right? This displays directly towards people within its region that China has the capacity to be aggressive if they deem you as a threat towards their own economic expansion. And we think that because of the fact, we think that we don't want to risk it, because we can already see and we can draw a parallel towards other countries in ASEAN that China has already displayed its aggression to, like Vietnam, for example, when they actually wanted to enter Vietnamese waters to utilize its recently built artificial islands as logistics hubs. We see that all of these reasons show that if it comes to it, China wouldn't hesitate to utilize the developments that they already have to actually show aggression and automatically like impact severely the economic and the social political landscape within the specific developing country, which is Malaysia in the first place. But secondly, we believe that it's harmful and non-beneficial at all in the first place because existing trade deals with China is not adequate. The reason why is because of the fact that we don't have a specific foreign policy pivoting towards China. It means that China is not comfortable with extending the best form of trade deal that it could possibly offer to us because they concede to the fact that there might be an instance whereby we will change our alignment at any time, or whereby we might do something that will be threatening, or we might take a non-strategic economic step that would harm the kind of deals or engagement that we already have with China in the first place. Therefore, that can be seen as a sort of risk towards them and would lead towards a reason as to why they do not want to engage with us directly or give us the best trade deal so long as we remain non-alignment. Therefore, within that, for those reasons, we don't see any reason as to why Malaysia needs to continue being non-aligned towards any foreign powers. What exactly is the comparative in our world? In our world, we think that China would have less likelihood to be aggressive towards Malaysia. This is likely for three reasons. The first is because they don't have incentive to harm their ally, which is Malaysia in this sense. But secondly, because of the fact that through an alignment with China directly, this means that they will be engaging in more trade deals and include Malaysia more in terms of how they expand their own economy. This means that hurting Malaysia would mean hurting themselves in return, and it's not something that they would want to do in order for their own benefit. But thirdly, even in the event where they those two reasons only. That is why, for those reasons, we believe that the foreign policy towards pivoting towards China is more strategic in comparison to remaining non-alignment. But let's look at an even if situation, right? Because even if this alignment with China would mean powers like US, for example, being unhappy with the fact that we are aligning ourselves with their direct competitor, we think at the very least, China has a strategic goal that they want to achieve, which is their incentive to exert control over the South China Sea. So at the end of the day, we think that this incentive to exert control over the South China Sea would mean they have the incentive to protect their allies in Asia, to ensure that they are still able to protect themselves, like geopolitically speaking. But it also means that they have a much clearer incentive than any other country, be it US or even their regional competitors like Vietnam, for example. Therefore, we believe that they have priority, they have proximity, and there is a lot of things that Malaysia stands to gain from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. To start the speech from the opposition bench, Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Sorry?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, the speaker is not good. The convenient piece of characterization that was missing in the speaker before me was the repercussions of Chinese development projects and BRI to states. We have retrospectively seen airports being taken away, shipping ports being taken away, countries in crippling circumstances because of the inability to pay loans to Chinese governments. They have largely ignored the manipulative marketing scheme that Chinese governments have over these regions, and is to chokehold on these regions, and these regions will ultimately be volatile. I think that's an important characterization we have to start with. In my speech, I'm going to establish two standards. The first, what exactly does Malaysia want, and are we desperate for this money? And secondly, we'll talk about what China wants and what happens in a world in which development projects happen. Before I talk about this, let me just really quickly talk about what exactly is non-alignment, because clearly it was misinterpreted by the speaker before me, and what is background, because it's significant. Firstly, what does non-alignment look like? I think it's important to pause it. The non-alignment does not mean that we will say, China, let's fight, and we'll go through conflict with each other. We think non-alignment simply means that we can still have some form of economic ties, bilateral trade with China, but what we do is that we will not accept development projects, for example. We'll reject the loans that you offer. Why is this piece of characterization not convenient and actually a realistic definition of non-alignment? Because that is status quo. Status quo is such that we don't align our views to China in terms of getting loans, but we have some form of economic ties and trade, which we think is something that we still support in our world. But even the worst case will defend also why this thing is not probable. What about background? We think it's important to note that Malaysia and Chinese economic ties were always existent in terms of businesses, in terms of providing China quality petrol, for example, in exchange for weaponries that they provide to us. And we also have specific regions in which tech products are not taxed. And we think all this show that there's some form of economic ties that happen. But later on during Najib's regime, we think there's an embroiled scandal that happened in which all the Chinese money went into the pockets of Najib Razak, where he went to like Rosmar's like Louis Vuitton wallets and so forth, so on and so forth. What happened after that? I think the transition to Mahathir was that he was harder on China as a result of this. And he instilled a lot of anti-Chinese sentiments to the citizens as a result of this, and people generally hated China because we knew the Chinese money went into Najib's pockets. To a large extent, we've also stopped a lot of development projects, halted a lot of contracts that happened in China because Mahathir was generally hard on China. I think that's an important background that we go to. Okay, are we really, okay, firstly, let's talk about what does China want and what happens in a world in which they don't accept these deals. I think it's important to note that the interest of China is to have significant control through soft diplomacy. This looks like the Belt and Road Initiative. This looks like giving predatory loans to nations in order for them to have hopes of the nations not being able to pay back so that they can consolidate that area. We've seen Sri Lanka losing their shipping port as a result of not being able to pay loans. We've seen Pakistan having to break their railroads because the project in of itself wasn't completed. We think in a lot of circumstances, Southeast Asian countries will be victims of the loans that Chinese governments do. Propositions burden this debate is to prove why Malaysia is an exception. It's an exception to not wanting to have these repercussions faced on that. What's the added benefit that we can give to China that is so different from these other countries that will result in Malaysia not being victims of this loan? We think ultimately those countries that were in crippling sanctions in the time of pandemic, instead of focusing on their citizens, they are focusing on paying back these loans, and we wouldn't want to go into that circumstance. We think it's important for them to do that. Secondly, we think rejection is possible. It is really possible, and we've seen countries rejecting BRI initiatives in those countries. And because China has no historical hard power or hostility towards countries in those circumstances, it is perfectly possible for Malaysia to reject this deal and at the same time not go into war. I think that's an important piece of clarification. Let's talk about economy and are we really desperate? It's important to note that the argument is not that Malaysia is struggling economically. The argument is Malaysia is not struggling so bad economically that we are in desperate need of that help. What does this look like? We think Malaysia to a large extent have active EPF that we give to citizens. We think there are a lot of jobs that are growing even in the midst of pandemic, a lot of sectors that are thriving. Thirdly, we also have strong alliance with like OIC, international organizations, as well as we have raw deals with Europe, which we think is largely lucrative and profitable. On that regard, we think the economy in Malaysia isn't so bad that we need to compromise on our sovereignty and let Chinese government dictate what's best for us in developments, which will ultimately leave in economic shambles. But rather, we think we have enough backgrounds or rather alternatives that we can rely on to sustain ourselves. But even if you don't buy this characterization, we think there's also a fallback ground. We think there's also a backup plan that is important, which is IMF. It's important to know that IMF's current policy is that they have deferred dates for countries, or rather specific dates for countries to pay back loans if they've taken care of the pandemic well. Malaysia has shown that we've taken care of the pandemic well, with 60 to 70% of vaccines already kickstarting our governance and our healthcare system. This shows we are likely to get loans even in the worst case because of things like handling the pandemic well. So we think that fallback ground is also good. But secondly, we think Biden has also long-term projects in Southeast Asia, and we don't see why Malaysia cannot be part of it because they want to deter Chinese influence. All this means that our economy isn't that desperate and we don't need that help as of now. Before 5, like, okay, right now I can just have POI.
Look, the IMF, if you take loans from the IMF, they will literally tell you to accept foreign companies to literally take over your economy. Why is that necessarily better than China giving you money to build infrastructure projects that you get to benefit from?
Firstly, your comparative is they take over your land, they acquire land, they acquire shipping ports, and you are beholden towards Chinese governments for life. I think the comparative is, it is not as bad going to IMF, but secondly, you completely didn't acknowledge this is the alternative and this is the worst case. We already are doing so much okay in terms of economy. Deal with that characterization first, then debate even if. What is Malaysia? We think Malaysia has largely, especially in Mahathir's governance, we've rejected the ECRL deal, or rejected very important contracts that make or break Chinese influence over our country, because we generally had a dogma or narrative to say we don't want Chinese influence anymore as a result of the IMDB. This means there are anti-Chinese sentiments that already exist within Malaysian citizens. Coupled with the fact the pandemic, where they think China caused the pandemic, people hate China that much more. But let's look at the transition. What are we actually at, and what juncture are we at? Right now, we think number one, Malaysia is unstable politically, because we can see governance changing overnight, like without a mandate or without the votes of people or democratically. Secondly, we think there's neck on neck in terms of the opposition party, with PH with 91 seats and PN with 110 seats. This means, given the fact that we don't have a majority chokehold in our politics system where it's neck on neck, we think it's unstrategic for us to align our views and have long-term developments with China, because we'll compromise our sovereignty for short-term money that will largely be unsuccessful, because we will be in economic shambles in the end. We are not desperate for the circumstances right now. Secondly, we think it's long-term political suicide for Malaysia, because there is no sheer majority that we've chokehold on. Secondly, opposition have capitalized like hell on this, the fact that we're aligning with China. And thirdly, Malaysia has strong anti-Chinese sentiments that will never ever be peaceful to begin. For all those reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. Let's have the next speaker, Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Just checking, am I audible?
You are, but it's a bit echoey, so if you could probably not shout too loud, that would be nice.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah,
I'll
no
just,
problem.
hold on. I'll reduce the microphone volume, because I just naturally speak like this, sorry. Okay, you know what, it's at this lowest point. I think I have to speak, I'll just try to lower my voice as much as I can. This is good, right?
Yeah, sure, that should be fine.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Look, if you look at side opposition's argument about China being a bad actor, they only said China being a bad actor for the sake of being bad actor, without necessarily explaining to us what are the incentives of them being being aggressive or being completely expansionist and obviously going to give the worst amount of terms when it comes to trade deals. I think there needs to be clarification as to what exactly the type of actor that China is, and I'll prove to you why in one issue, which is why exactly China is not a factor. There are two reasons as to why, there are two characterizations I need to make. Firstly, what exactly is the incentive of China when it comes to making the trade deals within the Southeast Asia region? I think it's important to note that China wants to expand into ASEAN because of economic security, right? Because of the fact that they need control over the South China Sea, because they recognize that it's an important a weak point within China's borders, which means that if, let's say, a foreign actor such as the US was to be able to, for example, control important parts of South China Sea that literally decides 50% of all trade going in and out of China, means that China can be choked out of the global economy and hence lose relevance throughout the world. So they're not doing it out of the fact that they are just completely want to completely dominate the world, but rather they need incentives, or they need to have some form of buffer against US trying to outcompete or trying to choke them out from the global economy. But secondly, let's look at the loans and the things. The primary contention coming from opposition is about the loans and why they usually, when they give out those loans, are probably going to take over the infrastructure projects. But I think the problem with the loans or the things that they characterize is that they never really characterize to us what exactly those loans look like, why exactly that they're bad. I think that they're not exactly that bad. Why is this the case? Because often the way that they do this is by offering loans that are very low interest rates, etc. The reason why often in countries like Sri Lanka and other countries, they were able to take over those loans, or they were able to take over the infrastructure projects that those loans were designated for, like such as ports, was because the government over there literally mismanaged it to the point where they no longer could pay back to the back China for that project, right? Which means that it's not necessarily China's fault for giving out that loan, but rather because of Sri Lanka screwing up the loan payments so badly to the point where China could take it back as collateral, right? So this means that in order for us to prove whether or not Malaysia will be harmed by the fact that they give up by these loans, we need to analyze whether or not Malaysia will be able to pay back those loans, or how competent the government is. And if we know this, a lot of argumentation or a lot of material coming from side opposition seems to support the idea that the Malaysian government currently is quite competent. The fact that talks about Mahathir's government being able to do things such as allow a lot of employment or create a lot of economic activities that don't screw over the population, are currently trying to help the population quite well. And the response to COVID pandemic also seems to indicate the fact that Malaysia's government is supremely competent when it comes to dealing with a lot of things, right? What does this like? So additional reasons as to why this might be true is because because of like Najib's administration, we've taken an extremely harsh stance against corruption, and we funded the MCCA or the Malaysia MACC, to the point where in order to curb down corruption and never let something like Najib ever happen again. But secondly, it's also the fact that Malaysia is also quite extremely technocratic. Even though we have some form of like corruption, we still do things like quite well, and we make decisions that are quite beneficial to the overall country. What this means is that when we get loans from China, it's extremely unlikely for us to be unable to pay back those loans, like for example Sri Lanka and a lot of other developing countries. We think that it's probably likely that we'll be able to pay back those loans and also retain control over a lot of the infrastructure projects that China has to offer, right? And we think that this is extremely important because China is because of the fact that these infrastructure projects are really beneficial and allow access to all of the things that my Prime Minister already told you, things such as the One Belt One Road initiative that connects literally Malaysia to the rest of the global economy very, very well. Things such as the fact that China will probably give you a lot of good trade deals, etc. Even if we assume that the characterization coming from opposition is true, the fact that, well, China is probably going to take over the fact. Number one, 50% of global trade goes through is probably going to go to OBOR. The fact that China is becoming more increasingly big means that the economy expanding means that even if China retains control over the infrastructure, we get the fact that the global trade still goes through that infrastructure. Secondly, it's also the fact that China is already expanding and is already about to take over South China Sea anyway, because of the US pulling out from the South China Sea, because of the fact that they usually have issues, domestic and political issues that they need to deal with abroad. And secondly, it's also So what that means is that even if China does take over those infrastructure projects, it's not that bad because Malaysia still has those ports and has access to the ports and has access to the global trade. Second issue. Why exactly is that non-alignment is much okay? So hold on. Before I move on, let's just make a comparative, right? What did opposition bring up as a comparative? They tried to tell us that IMF is a better comparative. Notice, panel, that the IMF has literally screwed over so many economies in Africa and also recently Greece, right? Over the fact that when they give out those loans, they often put in a lot of terms when it comes to how exactly that you can spend that money, A, and B, how your economic policies are going to look like. Things such as austerity measures that crippled the Greek economy to the point where they no longer function to this day, or B, a lot of African countries that they force them to allow a lot of MNCs to come in where they have zero control over the MNCs and they lose control over their own economies. We think that China offers a far better alternative than the IMF will. They never really provided to us why exactly there is a good incentive as to why the IMF is probably going to be a good actor. We provided to you a list of characterizations and reasons as to why China is probably going to be a better actor. Secondly, why exactly non-alignment is harmful? I think the reason as to why we characterize non-alignment to be harmful is because when you have non-alignment, it's not only that you can take deals with China, but also the fact that you allow economic deals from places like the US or EU, which means that in the instance where you are non-aligned to any country, that means that there is some form of economic influence that comes from the US and EU that is probably trying to compete with China right now. The reason why this is extremely dangerous is because, as my Prime Minister said, the fact that China might perceive you as a threat because of the fact that there's strong US influence or strong US MNC influence within that region. The moment in which you align yourself with China, you're probably going to have Chinese companies come in, but you're also going to try to phase out as much economic influence from US as possible. And we think that means that you are less likely to be perceived as a threat the moment in which you align yourself with China, as opposed to just simply not being non-aligned and saying to the world that, hey, I can accept deals from anywhere, I can be influenced by literally any other country. On our side, we say that, yeah, we are going to be permanent to you, China. For all those reasons, propose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Let's have the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
I think I think government loses this debate when they still don't want to discuss the consequences of allying themselves with China for several reasons other than the dismissive content from the previous speaker who says we don't highlight and mechanize to you how these deals are executed, given the fact that we have told you multiple examples of not only in Sri Lanka and in Pakistan, but also in Malaysia, where the East Coast Rail Link a $20 billion project failed, where we were almost ready to sell a big plot of land in Johor to Chinese companies and Chinese developments. These are all examples of how China does not see Malaysia as an exception or the Southeast Asia as an exception, especially since they are the world's biggest economy. What is this region going to provide to them other than the fact that they want to move labor here, they want to create sweatshops because it is at a cheaper cost, and they want political influence, which they have been consistently doing for the past 20 to 30 years, ever since soft diplomacy became a thing for China. All of this gravitates towards the fact that this is the condition that exists whenever China tries to enter a specific nation. There is literally no exception of China going into a smaller country or a developing nation and developing its economy benevolently and creating access to this expanded trade market that creates all these opportunities and chances. If that were true, maybe if this debate was happening 6 years ago, there'd be a chance for opposition to use this characterization. But there's already evidence of countries like Nigeria who had to give up their whole entire fishing economy due to the fact that they were late on loans. These are all instances of where the company is not doing well, even though they have access to all of China's supposed expanded trade markets and all their people, because they have nothing to offer. What is Malaysia going to offer to this expanded trade market that China can create? Even if there is a benefit, they must prove why this benefit is accessible and will create the outcomes that they're talking about. As to this stage in life, the fact of the matter is they have access to more countries but with nothing to provide, unless batik suddenly becomes the most amazing product in the whole world that everyone wants, and then we can capitalize on this expanded trade market. I don't know, maybe I'll get a response in the next speech. But it's also important to recognize that the reason why we must align is because the fear of retaliation, because when you are not aligning to any specific nation, China will think that, oh my god, Malaysia is in US one, and they will perceive Malaysia as a threat. Are you kidding me? China has the largest standing army in the world. They have a $1.7 trillion economy, and they are the biggest markets in the entire world. They are afraid that Malaysia is aligning themselves to US just because we have a couple of trade deals with them. Where is the evidence that this is likely to be true and China will retaliate with aggression? All of this points towards the fact that every other country in this world doesn't only trade with China or doesn't only trade with the United States. China trades with the United States and are angry with the fact of the trade deals. How does this indicate at any level that because Malaysia is not saying China is the best, come on, take my country, take my land? God forbid, in Arshad's final minutes, he said, come China, take me and I'm ready to go. All of this gravitates towards the fact that this is not representative of what's happening in the real world on the ground, given the fact that, politically speaking, everyone still has anti-Chinese sentiment that they still have yet to respond to. And we give you evidence of why this anti-sentiment is true, and we give you evidence that why people cannot think about the long game. In the best case of their world, where we assume that this creates accelerated recoveries or these loans will allow to embolden the economy and give Malaysia a global positioning and standing, do you honestly believe that the average person on the ground is able to foresee this benefit and are willing to make the sacrifices that Arshad is willing to make? No, because the automatic perception is you are selling out to China, just like what Najib did, and that's the reason why we didn't want Najib. Beyond the fact of corruption charges, there was also a demand for Mahathir to be tough on China, which he tried to do for the first couple of months that he was in charge. And given that those policies were extremely popular on the fact that he was willing to pay millions of dollars to breach the contract, these are all instances of where people are not going to be as foresighted as Ashraf claims in order to access these benefits. Finally, it's also important to recognize this IMF China thing. I think it's an extremely small issue, but just to double confirm, their version of what China's policies and China's loan is their best case and most probable case. Our version of the alternative of IMF is the fact that it is A, the worst case, and B, that for every instance of example of Greece going bankrupt, I can give you 4 more examples of how other nations have suffered crippling economic collapses even after the pandemic due to China's predatory loans. So on that basis alone, we still take the comparative. And yeah, And finally, on the idea of Malaysia's competence, before I'm moving into substantives, in the idea that these deals are failing in Sri Lanka and Pakistan because Sri Lanka and Pakistan are horrible. Are you kidding me? Najib single-handedly took all these loans and moved it to the 1MDB Providence Fund in order for him to use this, in order for him to use it for his own personal gain. Do not conflate the fact that because governments have changed and because they are successes in revitalizing healthcare, I'll take you in a minute, revitalizing healthcare, they are suddenly going to become competent in managing money. There are so many instances of where the budget is completely non-representative to the average Joe and how he is feeling on the ground and whether he can have a job or not. To that extent, Malaysia is going to be competent enough in order to ensure that these things happen. And secondly, this dewards the analysis, the fact that these loans are designed to fail. If you take a look at how they want to move labor there in order that jobs are not created here so that it doesn't revitalize the economy. China purposely delays the development plan so that people cannot pay loans on time and follow the timeline, and then they are beholden to all of these loans and makes it even worse. All of this evidence gravitates to the fact that even in the best case of where they are competent, they will still fail because that's the plan of China all along. Before I move on, yes, PY.
Now, your LO's speech was indicative that Malaysia's government is somewhat competent and hence there's no need for the loans. But at the same time, your speech was talking about how we as a nation are probably going to be incompetent in dealing with money. Which characterization is true?
Yeah, no, firstly, I think that's misconstruing what I said. I literally just said, do not conflate competence in healthcare with competence of money management. Secondly, we told you, even in the best case of where your case is true, and this is acknowledging you, we tell you that these loans are designed to fail. Finally, it's also important to recognize all the benefits are not accessible to the goals that they set. How can you develop economically? How can you ensure that these things can happen, given the fact that Malaysia has not shown to be a progressive nation in utilizing money for development? It has been time and time shown again, the people in positions in power right now care about no one else other than themselves. They are willing to take prime ministership without a mandate. They are willing to create budgets that disproportionately funds Islamic material in comparison to jobs that are necessary and needed right now, because they believe that that will embolden their own pockets and embolden their own voter bases. Even if in the best case of where China is benevolent and cares about Malaysian democracy, ultimately this money will go into the hands of people who will not be able to achieve these goals that government tried to create. It's very nice to hear the speech about how Malaysia can develop to the point where they can achieve a global standing. But given how Malaysian politically is now, given the fact that Chinese loans are like this, there needed to be more evidence as to why Malaysia is special. And even if it is special in Malaysians' hearts, I don't think so it can differentiate itself from everyone else that have suffered from Chinese loans. For those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Let's have the government whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, okay. All right, hold on. Let me just time myself. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition has been extremely uncomparative, unengaging, and debating in their own world. Op came here and made the debate extremely messy because most of their speech, both LO and DLO, revolves around the same thing, anti-Chinese sentiment, not actually engaging with the issues of this debate. So let me debunk the argument of anti-Chinese sentiment first before I actually get into the issues of today's debate. So they came here and stated that, oh, there's a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment, therefore the alignment won't work and things like that. My question is, why is the anti-Chinese sentiment necessarily bad? They did not prove that exactly. For them to prove that, they need to point out exactly who does this affect, the existence of this anti-Chinese sentiment, who exactly does this affect. If it doesn't affect the governments, or both Malaysian governments and Chinese governments, it literally doesn't do anything. It's just that there are anti-Chinese sentiments. Understand that there can be anti-Chinese sentiments and Malaysia can still align themselves with China in and of itself. This happens all the time, right? Like countries align themselves despite having anti like that country or this country sentiments. It can work, it can cohabitate together. If opposition whip comes here and brings new analysis as to why this anti-Chinese sentiment is really bad and this outcome is the most important, it's new matter and it cannot be admissible in this specific debate. Two issues in this debate and two main issues in this debate. First issue, whether or not China will actually be a bad actor by imposing tyrannical hegemony as what opposition came here and painted on. By the way, okay, yeah, all right. First level of analysis, is it likely that China will actually do that? Opposition came here and stated something. Oh, we are missing that the fact that the one belt, one road manipulation and things like that happens, right? Understand that firstly, those countries who were non-alignment. They didn't even align themselves with China. And here are three reasons why opposition's claim won't manifest as to China will come here and put in like loans that Malaysia cannot even pay. Number one is because China doesn't have the incentive to weaken its allies. Two layers to this. The first layer is due to the fact that it's nonsensible for China to want to weaken its allies, since that's bad for its incentive of propagating regional influence. The second layer is due to the fact that the weakening of Chinese allies is going to look bad on China, and this will be elaborated further. Chair, notice how the argument of opposition that China will impose some kind of tyrannical hegemony assumes that Malaysia has no leverage whatsoever, and this is pointed out by Arshad and not engaged whatsoever by the deputy leader of opposition. Understand that many factors need to be considered when evaluating leverage. Malaysia does have leverage against China, and if we can prove that it does have leverage against China, this kind of tyrannical hegemony won't occur in our world. Here's two things that need to be considered. The first being that China is ensuring their influence to be expanded, right? That's China's incentive. This includes them actively getting allies, but it also includes them ensuring that their allies are still happy with aligning themselves with China. Meaning to say that if Malaysia aligns itself with China, China needs to make sure that Malaysia is happy with aligning itself with China. If Chinese allies witness China screwing over Malaysia, that's going to instill fear in other allies of China. All of these alliances is a house of cards, right? When one ally pulls out and runs to, say, United States or something, it's just a matter of time when other allies do that. This looks like Malaysia having used to be close to like the West for aid and for economical development, but then when Western hegemony started on, the entirety of ASEAN just decided to become neutral, right? As powerful as China is, it by itself cannot do anything. It needs allies, right? And it cannot risk losing allies, hence making it so that the image of China that opposition is painting is just oversaturated and it's like illogical. There isn't going to be some kind of two country, one system where Malaysia just aligns itself with China and China totally dominates Malaysia, putting in sweatshops or whatever that opposition came here to propagate, right? Not only that, but the second thing to consider is that the fact that Malaysia has the Malacca Strait, this is especially important since China's main economical like income comes from two things. Number one, development. Number two, coming from exports. If you block the Malacca Strait, China is screwed when it comes to exports, since most of their exports come out from there, not engaged whatsoever by opposition. Second analysis as to why China won't likely become a tyrant or something, right? China's incentive of wanting Malaysia to align itself and ensuring that Malaysia doesn't pull out support. Here's why China wants to take in Malaysia. Like, okay, opposition came here and stated that the only reason why China wants to take in Malaysia is to have sweatshops and things like that, and argues that we have no comparative advantage. Three things that Malaysia can offer. Number one, regional support. We have to support China, and this is something which is in line with China's incentive mentioned by both of my speakers. Second thing is that the existence of the Malacca Strait, also mentioned by me just now, the existence of this Malacca Strait ensures that China has the ability to export its goods, export its products. Third is Malaysia is the biggest chip supplier in the world, and this is something which is extremely important to China, since China's main economy, a driver of the economy to ensure that it becomes at the top of the world, is technology. China needs this kind of chips, and China needs Malaysia to continuously supply this kind of chips. These are the comparative advantage. I hope that opposition will engage with this. Second big issue in this debate, is it necessary for Malaysia to align itself with China? First level of analysis, the context of Malaysia. The context of Malaysia is conveniently disregarded by OP, which was meant, and the context of Malaysia is mentioned by my first speaker, is that Malaysia is a developing country. Opposition came here and said that the economic condition of Malaysia isn't bad to the point where we need China. Understand that due to the fact that Malaysia is a developing country, this means that Malaysia needs to be building a lot of infrastructure, but we don't have enough money for it. Not to mention that we need to have this kind of development to ensure we create a ton of jobs, as what Arshad mentioned to you, right? Opposition came here and demonized the One Belt One Road initiative. I've already mentioned to you why China has to be more diplomatic with the loans they give to Malaysia if Malaysia is aligning itself with China, because it needs to ensure that like Malaysia doesn't turn away or like align itself with another country, right? But even if you don't believe that, opposition needs to counterproof two things, assuming that Malaysia really doesn't need China, right? Number one is that Malaysia can still have sustainable development, assuming that we don't have to noting how we don't have to finance, and also noting how like we just don't have the resources to build these kind of things. Number two is that China suddenly won't offer any loans if Malaysia doesn't align. This is the nonsensical thing coming from opposition that suddenly assumes that if Malaysia doesn't align, China won't suddenly offer any loans that's going to like tie Malaysia's hand behind its back or something, right? Second level of analysis, what happens when you align with China? You get a better deal. You get more diplomatic loans. You get loans that you can pay back. Number two is that you ensure that your economy is thriving, because as a developing country, you need this kind of loans to be like starting your development projects and things like that, right? And number three is that you prevent Chinese aggression, i.e. meaning to say that China doesn't have to be as aggressive towards you to ensure your regional support, right? This is because there's two ways to ensure regional support, either through the spread of diplomatic ties or through the spread of fear. We eliminate the spread of fear because we have diplomatic ties, right? Chair, before I end my speech, two arguments of government which is still standing. Number one, Malaysia has its own leverage. Number two, Malaysia needs to align itself with China to ensure that China doesn't become too aggressive. I hope opposition can finally engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip. Let's have the opposition whip. Here.
I'm just checking if I'm audible.
It's a bit damn.
What is China's policies? What have they done? And based on that, what are they likely to do? And how that fits into this debate. The first is China's interest in this region has never been to energize this region to a point in which it can compete with the northeastern nations or to compete with the Europe bloc or the North American bloc. China's interest here is the fact that costs are low, it's an untapped market, and it is free from political influences from most powers because of its geographical distance from the majority of superpowers. Ergo, every entry that they have done in regions, in countries in these regions, has resulted in stemming greater political influence in the long term, ensuring that there is always going to be a fail-safe of where in the event most countries fail at paying these loans, which is a cost analysis, which is a cost benefit that they have made in decision that it is likely that they will fail. Not only with the fact because that they are underdeveloped economies or they are slowly developing economies, but also because these policies are designed to fail. It's there to show that you don't have alternatives, so take mine. And it worked in countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Nigeria because either A, they were short-sighted and the repercussions were too fast before they can recorrect themselves, or B, they literally had no alternatives. Countries that are in Africa that are poor, that cannot rely on nations like US's benevolence or international monetary organizations that provides for funds. All of this means that these are instances and evidences of what they have done in either A, grappling the majority economy in countries like Nigeria, where they completely took over the fishing economy and moved labor there so that the jobs that even though that were created moved there, or B, in countries like in Sri Lanka or in Pakistan, destroy projects that they have built or take over projects that the other countries have built. All of this shows the instances and evidences of why this is likely to happen. What are the examples of this happening in Malaysia? The East Coast Rail Link that was paid for 20 billion, 90% of it was paid, but only 15% was completed. Because this is the design to make the timeline of development longer so that the time to pay the loan becomes closer. And when you fail to pay the loan, you give up these projects. To some extent, we have mitigated this end goal outcome, but government team wants to re-energize these products in the hopes that things will change. This moves to the second question. Is Malaysia special? Because this is another question that they needed to answer to show why Malaysia is free from all of these things in likeliness of happening. We told you no. They're in political shambles where there's no specific majority, and all the corrupt ministers that were on part of Najib's cronies are still in places of government. Then they tell you, no, we have things like the MACC, corruption charges, we're very strong now. But this doesn't change the fact that the Sheraton move is still unpunished. This doesn't change the fact that our AG had to retire. This doesn't change the fact that leaders in opposition politics, political party, when they have done on that, can party hop freely and suddenly become allies to the government. All of this indicates that Malaysia is ripe for short-term benefits in the hopes that China can exploit and gain this evidence. This leads me to the final comparative is what is the end goal? In the best case of government, because I think we've already argued the most probable cases in all three speeches, is that you get these short-term loans, you use it for the economy, and in the long term, you succeed in paying off these loans. it still doesn't take away the fact that infrastructure, businesses, and labor movements will still be prioritized by China. The fact that anti-sentiment against Chinese of selling out to China will exist. The fact that the political instability relies on people cooperating with the government will still exist. These are all consequences that they never bothered to deal with. In our most likely case, or in the worst case, we lose some deals, we lose short-term money, but given the fact that we have a wealth of alternatives, and we have shown that we are having a recovery rate from the pandemic due to our good management of the better management of the healthcare. These are all instances of why we are not desperate enough to accept these short-term goals. For those reasons, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, opposition reply. Let's have the last speaker of this debate, government reply. Here.
Side opposition can't just simply come up here and tell us like random outcomes of cleaning out of China, but not necessarily explaining to us why those specific outcomes are like extremely important. For example, anti-Chinese sentiment. So what? Like some part of the country hates China, but if it is able to bring us the economic benefits that is important for the country, then I think it's fine to trade that off because there are literally no impacts to a lot of the argumentation coming from Malaya. There are two important parts of my speech. Firstly, I'm just going to deal with ops cases as a whole and just point out some characterizations that just simply don't make sense. And secondly, will China be predatory? And I'll be answering that question. So the spoiler will be no. So first, ops case, right? Notice that the characterization of China is quite weird because they try to tell us that China is this monstrous entity that will sort of flick Malaysia off the face of the earth at any time of the at any time. Notice that it means that, wouldn't it also mean that it's probably beneficial for Malaysia to sort of start aligning themselves with China the moment in which we already acknowledge the fact that China is already really strong? We think that in the moment in which we don't align themselves with China, or Malaysia doesn't align themselves with China, that's where probably a lot of harms, or we're not able to access a lot of the benefits that China is able to accrue. Just the fact that it's already big enough, it's already, it's probably going to like get what it wants through force. We think that we're able to avoid all of those harms by just simply aligning themselves early and avoiding like Chinese aggression early. But second, let's move on to the question, and the main question in this debate, which is China a harmful actor? I think what exactly was ops case in this debate? I think they tried to tell us that China is inherently a very oppressive regime and will want to take over people and is seeking like global domination. And so usually the loans that they design are designed to fail. For example, like when we want to have ECRL, they're probably going to give us loans, but they're with the expectation that we're probably going to fail, or the fact that there are terms that will lead to us not being able to pay it back. Notice that the key assumption within this characterization or this argument is that Malaysia has no ability to negotiate those loans. We already give you a list of reasons as to why there is a good incentive or there is good leverage that Malaysia has when it comes to negotiating the best terms that we can have with like China when it comes to the types of loans that we can get. For example, the fact that we own a geographical advantage within the area, the fact that we have the Malacca Strait means that if we negotiate with China, we can offer the Malacca Strait to them. And if they refuse to give us good terms, we can always go to the we can threaten to go to the US. And so what that means is that there is some form of leverage. But secondly, it's also the fact that that Malaysia also has industries that are specifically important to China, things such as chip manufacturing, which is primarily located in Penang. We told you that this is primarily important because of China's China's technological or China's focus in technological industries, which means that there is some form of leverage there, which means that we can negotiate terms that are better for that won't be designed to fail for us, right? What that means is that the harm of Chinese takeover coming from China, coming from opposition, is absolutely untrue. Lastly, even if we if we look at the argumentation coming from them, they also assume that the governments, the Malaysian government will probably be incompetent when it comes to dealing with the loans, and so are probably going to fail in paying back those loans, and are probably going to have forced China's probably going to take over those infrastructure. We already give you a list of reasons and characterizations to why the Malaysian government is probably very good in making decisions and probably going to be very well financially managed, because all of their assumptions is keyed upon Najib, for example, being in power. When we told you a lot of corrupt people are already kicked out of government and we already had a whole political revolution about it, etc. What that means is that corruption is extremely unlikely coming from our side, and we're probably going to be able to pay back those loans, and we'll probably be able to maintain the we're probably going to avoid most of the harms coming from opposition. For all those reasons, propose.
Thank you very much, government reply, and thank you to all teams in this debate.